Greetings, gamers. I'm Bedroth.
And I'm Lee from the Sound Test.
And you're listening to Very Good Music,
a VGM podcast.
Welcome back, everyone, to episode 4 of our 4th season, showcasing some of our favorite composers, and also, in the instances of last week and this week, some of our guests and listeners' favorite composers. I'm really excited this week to dive into an area of the VGM scene that I don't really explore all that often. I grew up on consoles like the NES and the SNES and the Genesis, and I didn't play a whole lot of computer games growing up, outside of a few DOS games like Commander Keen and Doom. So I was not exposed to names like Jonathan Dunn, Jero Intel, and Rob Hubbard until I started listening to VGM podcasts. And these are some of the giants of systems like the Commodore 64, which is an 8-bit home computer, for anybody who isn't familiar, first introduced by Commodore International at the Consumer Electronics Show in January of 1982, and hitting the market later that same year, which I also was introduced that year, so a little bit special to me. While the Japanese market remained dominated by systems like the PC-88 and Sharp X1, which we heard some from last week on the Koshiro episode. In the UK, the C64 was a massive success, rivaled really only by the popular ZX Spectrum. And even in the US, the system outsold names like IBM and Apple and Atari, so the Commodore 64 was a big deal. Now, this episode is not all about the C64, but we will definitely be touching on it. But I am going to go ahead and introduce my guest, who can tell us a little more about what this episode, or who this episode is about. Listeners, I am very, very happy to introduce my friend and VGM podcasting colleague, Lee Tyrrell of the Sound Test.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Bedroth, and let me first say it's an honour to be here. And this is a really great idea for a season that you've got going on here, focusing on different composers like this.
I really like it. I realized that I like the jumping around and picking different topics, which a lot of podcasts do, but I also really liked the idea of taking sort of an uber topic, if you will, and focusing just on that. And it's been really rewarding. I have found out a lot about composers that I thought I knew well, and it's also going to give me the chance to explore some composers who I'm not as familiar with. Later in the season, for example, I'm going to have Alex Messenger on, who recently, I believe you were a guest on his show, and we're going to talk about his favorite composer, Mick Gordon, who I have enjoyed, but I do not know nearly as well as Alex does. So just like that, this is going to be a learning experience, because you're bringing a composer that I had never heard of before I heard him on your show.
Well, first off, that Mick Gordon episode's really going to be something to look forward to. But the ironic thing here is, man, that I'm very much in the same boat. That I never grew up on the C64, or even I played a little bit of the ZX Spectrum when I was really, really young. But this is something that I came to through my research of video game music. And I just think it's undeniably some of the most interesting stuff, as well as like the whole historical edge of the whole thing, and that they were really building this stuff from the very beginning.
Yes, yeah, and one of the things we talked last week about how Yuzo Koshiro was one of the innovations that he did was actually custom making hardware that could make his music sound the way he really wanted it to. Of course, Tim Follin also famously did a lot of that and really almost rewrote the script for every system that he ever worked on to make his music sound the way he wanted. One of the things about the C64 that, from my very light research that made it stand out from its competitors, is that it had some custom hardware that allowed it to create superior visuals and audio compared to some of its competitors on the market.
Yeah, well, the SID chip, which was the sound chip within the C64, is just legendary, and it was years and years ahead of its time. And on a technical level of what was available to do on it, it wasn't bettered, if you ask me, until like the Sega Mega Drive. And I know that's kind of an opinion kind of shared by Rob Hubbard, of all people. But like big systems.
I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, like the Nintendo Entertainment System, who you would have expected to put the most money into their hardware, is really years behind the SID chip in the C64, and it's kind of odd. I'm not sure why those innovations were pushed so big on the Commodore 64, but then it didn't really catch on in the industry.
It really is interesting. I remember Rob saying that when you interviewed him on your show, that when he compared the NES sound chip to the SID, that it just is so far behind. And when you hear a lot of these, like some of the composers I mentioned, and also our focus for today, and what they were able to do with that chip, it's really amazing. And when you hear more about the NES and SNES sound systems, it's almost crazier that there is such great music on those systems, because it was almost made in spite of the hardware.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the SID has really been seeing a resurgence here in the 21st century. I know that the demo scene it really has been thriving in the demo scene. And your countryman, Michael Bridgewater, is also one of the podcasters who sort of got me into the game. And he's a pretty big deal in the demo scene as well, from what I understand over there, going by the handle of Mibri.
Yeah. I'm well aware of his stuff. I think we're friends on Facebook, and I'm constantly seeing him posting new stuff, and it's always amazing. It's so fantastic to hear new stuff coming out with the SID chip as well.
Well, we're talking about a classic composer for the SID chip today. Our focus for today's episode is a very special one for you, which I'll let you kind of explain why. But we're going to be talking about Ben Daglish, who was born in July of 1966 in England, and has a lot of great work in his repertoire that I was just totally ignorant of until I heard him on your show. And I did a little bit of a deep dive back then, and I explored some of that music again when you mentioned bringing him onto this show, and I was really excited by what I heard. Now, I haven't listened to any of the tracks that you sent me yet, because I really want my response to kind of be fresh, but you've got some heavy hitters on this. Why don't you talk a little bit about why you decided to bring Ben's work to the episode today?
Well, I have fairly emotional reasons as to why I choose Ben Daglish, which I think a fair amount of listeners, if they've heard me talk about Ben before, would be aware of. Mm-hmm. But I'll tell you what, Bedroth, I'm going to leave that for later on in the show, because there's a kind of semi-narrative running through, semi-autobiographical thing going on with the playlist. So we'll come to that as things go along.
Perfect.
And I'll just talk purely about how, when I was researching the C64 scene myself for a podcast about it, featuring Ben and Rob Hubbard, I'd never heard this stuff before. It was brand new to me. And so really, Rob Hubbard and Ben Daglish were my first dips into it, because I was interviewing them. And I'll just never forget how truly blown away I was by tracks like Monty on the Run, which is Rob Hubbard, but then in particular something like Trap by Ben Daglish, and actually watching it on the oscilloscope, showing how there's only 3 channels of audio going on here, and you can actually see the complexity of the composition behind that, and some of the tricks that he's pulling to make it sound like there's more than 3 instruments going on. And I just never thought of music in that way before, and VGM has kind of evolved beyond that. So going that far back, I was just amazed at the limitations that they had. And yeah, it was just the fact that Ben Daglish was one of the first to show me that, and it just so happens that he is one of the most legendary and best regarded in the industry anyway.
All right, perfect. Well, I am eager to start hearing this sort of musical biography that you've got prepared. So where are we going to start off today?
Well, Ben Daglish is best known, arguably, for the soundtrack to a game called The Last Ninja, which he also did with a guy called Anthony Leese. And he was so well known for his excellent work on The Last Ninja that it kind of irritated him. and he found questions about it kind of annoying because he was always getting asked about The Last Ninja and nothing else. And I remember tentatively asking him about The Last Ninja right at the end of the interview, and he was very funny about it, kind of, oh, that old thing again. But it is an incredible soundtrack, and so dense that there are going to be 3 tracks from it across this playlist in different forms. And I thought we'd kick off strong with a remix, actually, by Matt Gray, who also was a C64 legend and did some of Last Ninja 2, if I'm not wrong, if not all of Last Ninja 2. So he's got a lot of pedigree himself, and he's done a lot of modern-day remixes using C64 original sounds, which is really innovative, and mixing it with modern-day production techniques. And his remixes are just second to none. So I thought we'd kick off nice and strong with his remix of the Wilderness theme from The Last Ninja. So that was the main theme, the Wilderness main theme from the first Last Ninja, composed by Ben Daglish and Anthony Lees, but remixed in this occasion by Matt Gray, and what an incredible remix that is, eh?
Oh, it is. You and I were talking a little bit while we were listening about how Matt Gray, he was there, but he also, he was there in the 80s, but he also was still very active in the music scene, even up into the 90s and the 2000s. And that mix of sensibilities is really, really evident in this. The way that it built, and then when the melody came in, it really takes you on a journey, and it's really cool to me. The C64 has such a distinctive sound, and some of those, it's very bright. Some of those trills and the chimey arpeggios that you come in. Mm-hmm. My first exposure to that sound was Tim Fallon, and so I always call it the Fallon warble. But yeah, really love that, and I really like hearing it mixed with some of the more modern synth sounds in this. Very nice way to kick off the show.
And it's worth talking a little bit about some of those technical details on the C64, because that's a big part of why some of these tunes are so impressive, and it also plays into my next choice. I mean, you might be aware of this, yourself being a VGM voyager on those video game music seas, but those trills and those arpeggios are so prevalent in the C64 music and those old chip tunes, because chords simply weren't possible. Right. You could only play one note at a time on each channel. And sure, you could play 3 notes on each channel and then make a chord out of that. But then you've just got the chord. You haven't got a drum beat, you haven't got a bass line. So those channels are often dealing with other instruments. So how do you create a chord on a single channel that can only play one note? Well, you've got to go through all the individual notes in that chord super quickly. Exactly. Which creates a kind of trilly sound or arpeggios.
Right. Yeah, and when you add in the fact that you had to make room for sound effects as well, and the fact that really, by this point, we're used to hearing really complex chords that can be played by, 7 or 8 fingers on a piano or 6 strings on a guitar, that 3 notes is really just not going to do it for that sort of complexity of sound. And this is a really innovative way of getting around that composers like Daglish employed, and then influenced later composers as well.
I like to think of it like musical magic tricks, because they only had 3 waveforms to play with, if I'm not wrong. I mean, it's been a while now since I've done this research, but you had like 3 different waveforms available, and a white noise, which was usually used for drums and things like that. And you had to kind of creatively mix these different sounds and put different filters on them to approximate different instruments, to kind of trick the listener's mind into thinking, oh, that's a snare drum, although in reality it's just a little bit of complete white noise.
It is.
So this next track that we were going to come to, Deflektor, I've picked this because of its C64 wizardry. This is a SID from the C64, and it features a cowbell prominently, which is incredible stuff. That there's no such thing as a cowbell sound to choose from on the SID chip. You have to mix all these various waveforms together and try and find it, and that's exactly what Ben Daglish did. And because of how cool it sounds and so unique, it became pretty legendary on the C64 scene. Have you heard this cowbell in Deflektor? So that's why I picked this one.
Very cool. I'm excited about this. I think I remember hearing this on your episode, which I revisited this week in sort of preparation for this. And yeah, this is going to be a treat. So you said this is from Deflektor.
Yes, and I haven't got my notes in front of me, because as I said to you, I've had to be 2 meters away from my laptop right now to avoid noise. But I think it's... you've got the track right there in front of you. Is it 01?
It looks like, yes, 01 is what's labeled here.
Because I mentioned that on Alex's show as well, that very often these tracks didn't even have names back then. They would just give them numbers. So yes, this is number 1 from Deflektor. Okay, number 1 from Deflektor, and so much C64 musical wizardry going on in that. Not just the cowbell, but like throughout a lot of that, you could swear there are 4 different instrumentalists playing, but there just aren't.
Yeah, the wizardry is the right word. It sounds like an ensemble, like you said, and some of that percussion work is the best use of one of these older noise channels that I have ever heard. You've got such a variety of percussive sounds there, with almost like a rim shot, a bass hit, of course the cowbell, which plays a couple of different pitches depending on whether it's that standard 4 on the floor or if it's throwing in a little bit of a flare. And I mean, the melody is strong. Some of those soloistic runs were really impressive, and yeah, this was really good stuff.
And hey, check it out. If you want this for free, you can get it on an album called SID Effects 2 at c64audio.com, completely for free. Which is a total collection of Ben Daglish classics, by the way, so that fits in with today.
c64audio.com. What was that album called?
SID Effects 2. It's a tribute to Ben Daglish. Whole website's a complete toy box of this kind of retro goodness.
Perfect. We're going to put a link to that in the show notes, because I think after listening to this, if they're anything like me, the listeners are definitely going to want to check out some more of this stuff. One thing I meant to mention after that Wilderness main theme is that a lot of these tracks are going to be playing for longer than you're used to. I tend to cut things off after about the 2 or 2.5 minute mark, because that's pretty common for a lot of what we play. When you get into some of the later stuff and the big orchestral sweeping tracks, they can go a little bit longer. But these pieces were composed so intentionally to be as long as they are that I just wouldn't feel right cutting them off. And I know that you also have done quite a bit of preparatory work on these tracks to really make them perfect for what you want to do. And so if some of these go a little long, like our next one, just sit back and enjoy them, and it's going to be a fun ride.
Well, it's funny because music was one of the main selling points of those old C64 games back in the day, and it's interesting hearing interviews with Rob Hubbard, Matt Gray, people like that, who say the same thing, that they were going down to the shop and buying C64 games based on who the composer was. And it was always a big thing to have new music by a lot of these revered composers back then. So they did go long. They really made it a big event, massive, long tunes. And I think that also had to do with how long some of these games took to load. Because some of them were loading tunes.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I've definitely heard that on your show and on Michael's Forever Sound Version show. A lot of loading tunes are really, really, really great from these systems.
Yeah, and although these are obviously electronic tunes and there's a big electronic influence going through the whole thing, I often hear a massive prog rock influence in these old C64 tunes, which of course goes long as well. Yes.
Yeah, I think that prog rock in particular was a big influence on a lot of game music. Even composers like Koji Kondo and Nobuo Uematsu, you hear that influence in their work as well.
Absolutely. I've just started playing Final Fantasy VIII again for the first time. Like the fifth time. And it's jazzy, prog, rocky, so good, man. Because we came close. I suggested maybe I could do a Nobuo episode, because he is one of my favourite of all time. But no, I'm more than happy to do a Ben Daglish episode.
You know, it's funny. I currently don't have a new Uematsu episode scheduled for this season, but he has come up on every single episode because he is just so synonymous with the gaming industry.
It's ridiculous. I mean, I don't want to end up talking about Nobuo Uematsu now, because I easily could, especially considering I'm in the midst of a Final Fantasy obsession at the moment.
But we are here to talk about Daglish, and this is... Do you remember, again, I'm putting you on the spot, offhand, when Deflektor came out?
No, and I mean, that kind of ties into what I was saying before, is that, and it's something Alex said, it was a really insightful point of Alex's, is that in a lot of these cases, these games have kind of disappeared into the sands of time, because a lot of them aren't particularly good. And as I say, the selling point was the actual tune. And it's the tune that's surviving the test of time. And I believe you probably had to have been a big enthusiast in the 80s to even know what Deflektor is.
Well, based on my in-depth research here, by typing into Wikipedia, it looks like it was published by Gremlin Graphics in 1987. So
yeah, well, that sounds about right, because Gremlin Graphics, that was the big one for Ben. He was working with those for years.
And when you think of other things that came out in 87 on some of the other hardware, this is really outstanding.
Yeah, well, I mean, you clearly are good with your dates, and I've always been terrible in this area. I mean, when did the Nintendo Entertainment System come out? Is that pre-NES?
It's not. I mean, technically, the NES hit the market, I believe, as early as 85 or 86, but kind of like with the Genesis, which the Genesis was on the market, I think, as early as 88, but it didn't really come into its own until games like Sonic the Hedgehog came out in the early 90s. And since Mario didn't come out until, I want to say, we just had an anniversary, so I feel like I should know, but it might have been 85, because I think we did his 35th last year. So yeah,
still,
I guess
it's very much in that same kind of area.
It is.
Very early in the lifetime of the Nintendo Entertainment System, which, let me just say quickly, I love the music of, and there's so many great soundtracks. I don't mean to make this kind of a C64 beats the NES, but it's just, it really is incredible to hear the depth that these composers were going into on the SID chip that just simply wasn't even available on later chips.
It is, and it's really kind of, in a way, it's apples and oranges, because you're talking about different hardware, and with any hardware, you get into it you get out of it what you put into it. But as we've discussed, the NES was a little more cumbersome from a technical standpoint, and it was harder to get some of that complexity of sound unless you were just really either really dug into it, or if, like in Koji Kondo's case, if you were there kind of from the outset and you grew up with the hardware, then, it was you had a little bit of a leg up. But
and Koji was a very intelligent composer, because he knew that if you can't get too much complexity out of the actual hardware, you've got to get complexity out of the melody.
Exactly. Yeah, that's really his contribution, is just that melodic influence, and this and what you hear in tracks like the ones we've heard so far. Again, it's just a richer tapestry of sound, I think, than a lot of what you hear on the NES. It's about more than just melody. It's about the whole composition.
Well, I think one of the things that set apart the SID chip was its ability to, switch between waveforms within the same channel, and also some quite advanced filtering stuff. And I'll be honest with you, man, a lot of this stuff is beyond me, but there was some advanced filtering that you could do on the SID chip. And to bring this into the track we're going to hear next, which is Auf Wiedersehen, Monty, you can actually hear some of that on some of the ending guitar solo in this. And I hope you like yourself a good C64 guitar solo, man, because it cannot be beat. So this one was a sequel, or one of the sequels, to Monty on the Run, which is one of Rob Hubbard's big tracks and features one of the most famous C64 solos of all time. And interestingly enough, for this sequel, Ben Daglish and Rob Hubbard teamed up for this theme that we're about to hear now. The main theme of Auf Wiedersehen, Monty, is actually Rob Hubbard and Ben Daglish working together, and they made this whilst drinking in one night. And it's really, really incredible stuff. Worth mentioning quick before we get into this is how young Ben Daglish was when he started. I think he might have been as young as 14, but definitely was in the game by 16. Very, very young, made a big impression, and was very quickly able to collaborate with big names like Rob Hubbard for incredible themes like this, Auf Wiedersehen, Monty.
Wow. We were talking last week about how Koshiro was 18 when he started out, and that was impressive. But yeah, man, that is really something.
Yeah, he was like figuring this out in his bedroom with his friend Tony Crowther, who actually designed a lot of the games. But sorry, just had to get that little side point in there.
No, definitely. I like the context. And we're going to be sitting back and listening to a 6-minute odyssey of sound. It is nice to know where we're going to be going. So, all right, one more time. This is the main theme from Wiedersehen, Monty, and this was composed by both Ben Daglish and Rob Hubbard.
the main theme from Auf Wiedersehen Monty by both Rob Hubbard and Ben Daglish, just two of the top composers from the C64 era, so an incredible collaboration.
Very, very good stuff. That was a fast 6 minutes. I was surprised by how quickly that went by, and you were not wrong about that guitar. That was some very, very fun stuff.
Yeah, and not only the guitar, but as a first and foremost bass player, they really knew how to compose some incredible bass lines back then on the C64 as well.
You know, I forget sometimes. Every time you mention it, I'm like, oh yeah, Lee is a bass player. How long have you been playing the bass?
Oh, well, interesting question. Since I was about 14, I think. I haven't thought about that in a while, yeah.
That's really cool.
My dad got like a little bit of extra money from work one day, and I think he said something like, I'll buy you an instrument, what do you want? And my first choice was that I want to play drums. And he instantly said, no. What else? Yeah. So, okay, bass. Because I really didn't want to play guitar, because everybody else played guitar in my school. Anyone who was a musician played guitar. I was really eager to do something else. I still want to be a drummer.
Yeah, it's a really popular instrument here too. When you go to a college campus, it seems like every other corner there's somebody sitting back playing the same three chords on guitar. My dad was a guitar player in bands when he was in his teens and 20s, and got really, really good for a while. He still kind of kicks himself for never trying to go further than he did, but so I would have had a leg up, but guitar has just never really clicked for me. I thought about trying the bass at one point. Did play some drums back and forth, although I'm a lot better at just percussion than I am at the trap set. I did pick up a ukulele a few years ago, and I can pluck around fairly well on that, but that's about as close as I've come. So anybody who can play a quote-unquote real instrument, I always admire that.
Well, ukulele is a good one, because that's a great instrument to learn on, and interestingly enough, so is bass. So it's got a reputation, hasn't it, for being simple and easy and all of that, but the way I always look at bass is that it's easy to learn, but it's one of the most difficult instruments to master.
Yes. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, and I have played in a couple of little bands in college. Most of the musical, like band experience I've had has actually been through, like, church music groups and things like that. And the bassist at the church that my wife and I went to when the kids were younger said the same thing. He was a really good player, and we had a couple of the youth group kids want to try to learn, and they very quickly found out that to play it well, you really had to be in the game, you had to listen, and you had to be able to really support the melody and the rhythm at the same time, along with the drummer. It was, it's really cool stuff. But yeah, the bass line in this track also stood out to me, and you and I remarked that we heard some of that cowbell pop back up.
Yeah, and I didn't notice that until now. I've been listening to this track for a long time, but editing it for this show, yeah, it did pop up there, didn't it? I think he'd made a bit of a name for himself by crafting that cowbell sound. Very cool.
And Rob Hubbard is a name that, as I mentioned, a lot of my listeners will be more familiar with. And if you want to hear more, I've talked about it a couple of times. I don't remember the number of the episode, but it was fairly early on, because I think this was back in 2018 that you did your episode with Ben and Rob.
Oh, well, now you mention it, I'm not sure I know the number. It's my episode. I think it's either 13 or 14,
yeah.
I think. But yeah, it's in season 1 of the sound test, and man, I am very, very proud of that episode, and it's all because of doing the research there in the moment and having interviewed these guys. I kind of realised, like, this is really special and important stuff and real history to VGM. So I went all out on that one, nearly killed myself.
We'll talk a little more about it at the end, but I definitely want to talk up your show a bit, because it really is very unique in the landscape of VGM podcasts, and I'll be excited to talk about that a little bit more. So you mentioned that this is sort of a biographical musical journey. What's the connection between Auf Wiedersehen Monty and this next track that we're coming up on?
Well, the whole thing's loosely chronological, because there are definitely some game releases that are out of time here.
Yes.
The chronologicalness of this kind of comes a lot more clear later on, but this is a good one, because we're jumping here from the C64, which was Ben Daglish's main playground, to the Amiga, which Ben Daglish only did a little bit of work on, and he didn't work too much on other systems, and also didn't transition into later systems like Rob Hubbard did do some work on the Sega Mega Drive. I don't think Ben Daglish did. So this is an example of some of Ben's work on another chip. I hope it's the Amiga. Good God. But yeah, it must be the Amiga, because otherwise I wouldn't be so confident about it. And this is Federation of Free Traders, which is just... I'm not sure there's all that much depth or interesting stuff to talk about here, besides it's just one of my favourite tunes of his of all time. However, it does show how good he was at translating his flute playing into coded music, because he was a flute player first and foremost, since we're talking about instruments.
All right. Well, yeah, we'll definitely talk a little more about that when we come back from Federation of Free Traders.
Okay, so definitely from the Amiga, Federation of Free Traders, again by Ben Daglish, is just one of my all-time favourite tracks of his, and I'm glad we have been able to figure out that it's the Amiga, because, as I say, now I can talk about what's going on a little bit.
So the Amiga was sort of the sequel system to the C64, right? This was the next Commodore PC.
In many ways, yeah. And controversial in many ways as well, because several people back then were unhappy with the direction it was going sound-wise and preferred this really unique sound of the SID chip. But then, of course, there was the flip side of people who accepted that audio was going to evolve and go in different directions, because, of course, this has got a completely different sound.
Yeah, it does. You and I were remarking on that even to my much less trained ear, I heard that it seemed like there was more going on with this, and you came a little closer to approximating some real instruments, like that trumpet sounded like a MIDI trumpet, and and then the guitar sounded a little closer to the real thing.
If I'm not wrong, the Paula chip in the Amiga used 4 channels rather than 3, so you're right, it did have an extra channel, and it also worked completely differently. Rather than using waveforms and those kind of really simplistic electronics that things like the SID chip and the NES work with, we're moving into sample-based technology now, so you are absolutely right, and those samples could really be anything. They could be samples of waveforms, they could be samples of a keyboard, they could even be samples of Ben Daglish's real playing, but they'd have to be shifted down in quality a massive amount, and you would be able to hear that, and it's got a kind of strange ghostly sound when you do that. And I believe that might be what's going on with some of the flute stuff at the end of that, because, as I said, Ben Daglish is a flute player. I think he sneaked some real stuff in there, just really shifted down.
That's really cool. My oldest daughter, who our listeners know as Dusklights, is also a flute player, and so that'll be fun. I'll have to see if I can find some Ben Daglish performance to play for her, give her a taste of that.
Absolutely. Well, I can definitely give you the one to show her. I mean, we've got the audio for it later on, for sure.
Oh, excellent.
But I can send you a video so she can see it.
Very cool. So this was fun. Now, have you actually played any of the games on the list tonight?
Oh, God, let me go through them. I don't think I have. And I do actually own a C64. And I own like a good 30 games. I got a really cool bundle off a friend of mine. But I'm missing a specific wire, because of course now we're all flat screen LCD TVs. They haven't got the right inputs for Commodore 64s. So yeah, I still need to get that adapter off the internet.
I hear that. Wow. Yeah, and there have been a few episodes of mine where I haven't played anything on the list either, but it's a testament that we're the two of us, as we mentioned earlier, closer to the top of the show, just don't have a whole lot of personal experience with the system, and yet this music has made such an impact, especially on you, but just in my experience on the video game music scene as well. You just can't really talk about video game music without exploring this. So,
I mean, I have watched a few Let's Plays, and I mean full Let's Plays on YouTube of old Commodore C64 and ZX Spectrum games. And as I say, I've got a little bit of a memory playing ZX Spectrum games as a super young kid. And I said this on Alex's show as well. Unfortunately, a lot of these games just haven't aged well, and they now just kind of frustration fests. And you can see that in streams where modern day players just kind of can't figure out how to do it anymore, and the convention of the whole thing, the pacing of the whole thing is completely different. I think it's kind of a tough ask to ask people to go that far back, really.
It is, and you even find that this is reminding me of when I was a kid. There was an NES game that is famously just terrible. It does not play well at all. And yet, at the time, it was one of my favorites because I didn't know any better. I played it enough that I got a handle on it, and that's Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure on the NES, which I would not recommend that anybody go back and try to play. It's a horrible game. But, when you're that age and that's what you have that's what you learn how to play. And it's a good thing, despite the fact that the games haven't aged that well, that this amazing music has still survived and is still being celebrated even now.
Yeah, and it says a lot about the effort that these composers were putting in, and again kind of leans into that thing that they were the main selling point for a lot of these games.
Now, The Last Ninja, from what you said, actually was popular even as a game. That it was one of the more. Would you say that it was maybe one of the better or more well loved games on the system, or is it really just in his? Okay.
No, the game itself is very beloved, yes, and I think it takes an isometric perspective, which always helps in those old games.
Yeah.
And it's just really packed with genuinely good gameplay and some beautiful graphics, and spawned a good couple of sequels as well. So yeah, very, very well received, very well loved, and I think that's one of the main reasons why Ben Daglish is so strongly associated with it, because the music for it is great, but it's no better than anything else in his catalogue. So it's probably just that the game itself was so unbelievably popular.
Yeah. Well, and if I'm reading the list right, we're actually coming up on our second Last Ninja track. This is another kind of long one. This one approaches 6 minutes. Are you ready to move forward on the playlist?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a classical guitar arrangement of the main theme from the Wastelands by a very, very good friend of mine called Jamie Maxwell's. Cool little story to tell here, in that he just did this cover off his own back as a Ben Daglish fan, arranging the tune for classical guitar, and actually was able to get a comment from Ben Daglish on the video on YouTube saying what great work that he did. And I guess this is where we're going to have to reveal a little bit of the sadness that comes with Ben Daglish, but we'll go into more depth of it later on. That not too long after my interview with Ben, he unfortunately passed away, which kind of locked him into me even deeper than just loving his music. I was the last person to interview him, and I really wanted to go all out with the podcast as I was editing it, finalising it after his death. And I came across this classical guitar arrangement of the Last Ninja theme, which is just outstandingly beautiful. It really is just outstandingly beautiful, and seemed perfect for me to be the closing section of the podcast, which it sounds kind of twee to say it, but it's Ben Daglish's final public words to the world out there on the record. And so I really wanted it to be good and emotional and also kind of reflect him. This tune was perfect for that. I asked for permission to use it. Jamie let me use it, and we've become very, very good friends ever since.
That is very cool, and it's it's an honor to have this on my show as well. And I do encourage everyone, again, go and check it out. The ending of that episode, I think that you did a really great job. It came across exactly how you intended it to. It was a really powerful moment at this point.
Well, I really appreciate that, because again, I think I've mentioned this in the past, but I was actually editing the episode itself when I minimized, I think it was Microsoft Word, I was working on the script, and I minimized it, and there was sat Facebook, which re-uploaded itself with the news, and it was just like, what? I was literally just editing his words and excited at the idea of sending the final thing to him. Unbelievable.
Well, let's go ahead and take a second, and we are going to listen to, you said this is the Wastelands main theme from The Last Ninja, classical guitar cover by Jamie Maxwell.
Correct. The main theme from the Wastelands from Last Ninja, another Ben Daglish classic, this time rendered for the classical guitar by Jamie Maxwell, and what a beautiful rendition that it is.
That was so nice. I love a good classical guitar piece, and this is... I'm going to have to go back now and listen to the original and then listen to the cover so I can hear where it came from, but this was just beautiful. Really great melody.
Yeah, the original's like strangely electronic. Once you've heard that for the first time, it is like a lot. Well, it's a C64 tune, and it's got all those melodies there, and it's really cool. But after you've heard the classical guitar arrangement, which is just so amazing, it almost sounds like the original Last Ninja version is like a Commodore 64 version of that. If you know what I mean?
I do, and I can't remember if we mentioned it earlier while we were recording or if it was more off the record, but when you go back and listen to some of these older systems, I'll be the first to say that a lot of the NES tunes that I just love can be a little bit grating to listen to when you compare them to the more modern sounds, but there's a nostalgia in it, and there is also just you have to marvel at what these technical wizards were able to do with the sound of the time. And I'm of the camp that believes that limitation breeds creativity, that when you have fewer things to work with, you have to work harder to really make them sing, and I think that really shows in stuff like this.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more, and that's one of the reasons why I love C64 music so much, and Amiga as well.
There's a simplicity also, though, to Jamie's cover, because it is not heavily orchestrated. There's the guitar and some background synth and some percussion, and it's just a really, really straightforward, it feels like a really straightforward rendition of this classic tune. Very, very nice.
Yeah, it is, but it's almost like, I mean, those melodies are just so lovely, you don't need to do too much with them. But there are a lot of versions of this tune. I think it's one of the key tunes from The Last Ninja, which is one of the key games in Ben Daglish's bibliography. So yeah, there are lots of different versions of this. Orchestral, I think there are some metal versions by Fastloaders, who we mentioned off the record earlier on as well. Yeah, it's a classic.
Very cool. Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the Fastloaders on the episode. So the Fastloaders are they like a C64 cover band or just an older PC music cover band?
Well, I mean, it's C64 first and foremost, for sure. But yeah, they'll play stuff from the Amiga as well, and from related systems from the time, definitely. I've got my CD collection right to my left, and I'm looking at their 3 CD Amiga Rocks CD, cool. Which is fantastic. It's just brilliant. Yeah, Fastloaders are well worth looking into, and I've been lucky enough to see them live just before COVID kicked off.
I'm always interested in exploring more cover bands and artists, because there are so many great ones out there, so I'll definitely be looking into the Fastloaders.
And we're kind of continuing with another cover now that I'm a little bit sheepish about, actually.
Oh, yeah? Well, tell me about it.
Okay, well, this is a version of... Well, we've played an absolute classic by Ben Daglish. We've played lots of classics. This, I think, is his most underrated tune. And when I last looked on YouTube, it had something stupid like 100 listens, despite being uploaded 4 years ago or something.
Oh, man.
For me... Yeah, it blew me away straight away the first time I heard it, and it was a really early tune to make me fall in love with the music of the C64 and Ben Daglish, Return of the Mutant Camels. And I've done a little bit of research on the game in the past as well, and figured out that it's actually like a really small game. I think it might have even come out for free with a magazine or something. So really obscure little release, and its music hasn't survived as well as some of his other themes. But this is a cover of that by me, and I'm sorry to be so no, not at all. I'm trying to be arrogant, but it's just, since we're doing the whole Ben Daglish thing, this is the only VGM cover that I've ever done on my own. I thought we'll throw it in there. I mean, we could play the original Return of the Mutant Camels, but this has just so happened to drop on Spotify today, so, you know.
I think it's absolutely fitting because the whole reason we're talking about Ben is because he's so special to you, and you made this cover because of that, and I think it fits right in. This is sort of a tribute to his memory, and I think that including a tribute of yours within this tribute, it's definitely fitting. And I'm glad to have some of your work on here. You and I were just talking earlier on Discord today about some of what you have to offer on Spotify, and so I'll be excited for people to hear some of that. So is this like a main theme, or was there only one tune in Return of the Mutant Camels, or?
Yeah, again, my research has actually been unable to tell me this definitively because it's been really hard to find this game. It was a sequel to a much more popular game, and that's what you come across all the time. You just can't find so much about the sequel. So,
wow.
I believe this was probably the menu theme. A lot of these games had loading themes, menu themes, and then maybe one gameplay tune. I think it's a menu theme, if I had to guess.
Okay.
But yeah, it's just the fact that I fell in love with it when I first heard it, and it's quite simple and slow, and I'm not the world's best musician, so it seemed like a good one to attack. Follows Jamie Maxwell's cool guitar or rendition. This is a weird kind of twangy guitar rendition. I hope you guys like it, and if you do, check out the original because it's amazing.
All right, so we're going to listen to what is probably a menu theme covered by our special guest, Lee Tyrrell, from Return of the Mutant Camels.
So that's my version of Return of the Mutant Camels by Ben Daglish. It's actually an old traditional tune, but I can't for the life of me discover what it is. I've been trying to research that for ages, so if anybody can tell me, I'd love to find out. But my version's just called Mutant Camels, and it has just come out on Spotify if you'd like to check that out.
This is really nice. That's some good sound you got there.
Thank you, man. The whole project is like kind of quite messy deliberately, and the whole idea was I wanted it to kind of sound like some old dusty record that you might find in an abandoned building from some band that nobody's heard of. And it's kind of like, what is this?
Oh, that comes across.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going for. Some strange broken cassette that you'll find in the street that's unlabeled, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yep. You just got to hear what's on it.
Yeah. And it's strange and messy, but also kind of beautiful. That's what I was going for.
Definitely comes across. And I have a real soft spot just from growing up listening to my dad play acoustic guitar all the time. Guitar chordings when you can hear the fingers sliding up and down the strings. That's really something for me. I like it a lot.
I love that kind of Western Ennio Morricone kind of guitar playing style. It is kind of my style, really. I think because I play guitar too, but I'm very much a bass player first, and it informs a lot of my musical thinking. So I do approach guitar very similarly to a bass.
There's a level of focus here and kind of a directness that I'm hearing what you're saying, because this feels like, just from my experience playing with musicians, this feels like guitar sort of interpreted by a bass player. That you're not doing a lot of deep, complex chords. It's about the melody, which is also makes it fitting that it's for a cover of an older song that didn't have a whole lot happening.
Well, having said that, like, deep, complex chords is definitely a thing of mine, and I'm very big on that. But it's like, this is actually, it's actually a very literal translation of the original SID. So, like, everything is like one note, just like the SID is. Because I think on the original SID, it's just got the bass line and two different melodic lines running the whole time, which is two different guitars, and there is no drums.
I was going to say, how did you do the percussion on this? That sort of light. Are you playing that on the guitar?
No, I've got a bongo actually that I bought from South Africa, and it's actually like a really authentic, like, antelope skin bongo, and it sounds amazing. So I just recorded. Very cool. Yeah, I recorded 4 different takes of me just improvising on it, mixed that in, and I've also got this strange shaker thing that my mum bought for me, and I've got no idea where it's come from. It's got like shells around the side of it, and that's that thing doing that cool kind of thing. Very nicely done. Again, I just kind of sat and did it.
All right, very cool. And of course, we will have a link to Lee's Spotify in the show notes. And this was just, it was so nice. Very cool stuff.
I really, really appreciate that, man. It's from an album, well, a kind of mini album that takes that whole kind of approach, where that's the sound I was going for across the whole album. But interestingly enough, I think it's also comes, like, the whole kind of messy, kind of dark found approach, and the whole thing kind of comes from the way I work, and it's kind of tough to get into, but it's almost like a kind of mental health awareness thing. These kinds of things should be talked about, I think. It's a direct result of my suffering from ADHD.
Talk about that a little bit, because you're right. I think that it is important. So how does your art sort of grow out of your coping with ADHD?
Well, it's just in this particular case that the ADHD, specifically in my case, stops me from being able to focus on anything long-term or complete a project long-term. Say, record a song or an album over a long period of time and really, truly perfect it, which I think production-wise I probably do have the ability to do, but mental health-wise I don't. So I have to find ways to make it interesting, to do it all that night, right there that night, doesn't matter how messy it is. And reasons to make that work, and for the sound to still be good or interesting in some way, so it's not just, I've just thrown this together in a night. Because it's simply because if I don't throw it together in a night, nothing's gonna ever be finished.
That's very cool. And so you get this really, I would say it's polished, but it is polished in this way that it intentionally comes across as something that's less. I'm really having a tough time.
I like to think
my lexicon. Go ahead.
Well, I like to think one of the sounds I'm going for is quite immediate and intimate.
Yes.
And to bring things back to Ben Daglish, because I really don't just want to talk about my own music, there was very much a kind of channeling thing going on, or like I was really thinking about him and what it means to be connected to him in such a strange way as to have his last words in the public on my podcast and all of that kind of thing. I feel a kind of strange connection with him, and there was definitely some channeling going on there.
So very, very cool. When did you do this?
This was last year, not too long before Christmas, I don't think. Before I've now started getting involved in all my one-night VGM stuff, which, that might help explain some of that, actually. I'm kind of glad to get that off my chest, because I've been doing all this one-night VGM stuff, and the reason why it is one-night VGM is the same reason. It has to be done right then and there.
Well, and that level of immediacy is something that you hear also in, in things like game jams, and it's an important thing to talk about, because a lot of people in our generation, and especially in the newer generation, ADHD is it's definitely a big deal, and finding a way to cope with it that also gives you the ability to sort of put something out there that other people can enjoy, I think is a really great thing to have accomplished. So hats off to you, man. This was really good.
These struggles are real, and it's not something I ever intended to with this podcast, but it's nice to just, if there's anybody out there listening to this who struggles with the same things, then you're not alone. And that's kind of all I wanted to say. But I can bring this back to C64 music and old school composers and things like that. And that the one night VGM thing and the whole doing things in one night and trying to capture things right then and there it isn't just ADHD, so there's also a conscious side of it of, well, that's what they did. It was Ben Daglish, Rob Hubbard. Yeah, they did Alf Wiedersehen Monty in one night. Yeah. Barry Leach, when I interviewed him, did a lot of his incredible music in one night. Did it in the morning. Did a couple of tracks in the morning before doing a couple of tracks in the afternoon. And that's another limitation, isn't it? You were talking about limitations earlier on. Time is another limitation, and really force you to focus in on something and actually finish it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's been my problem as well. A lot of projects I've had, I didn't finish them because I tried to do that. And I tried to set up this huge thing, and then I just got overwhelmed. And so for me, that doing a podcast is the perfect thing to sort of arrest that tendency, because it's all very piecemeal. And I also, I have my partner in Shukapal, and that keeps me focused as well. So, yeah, definitely. Again, limitation breeds creativity, and
I definitely think so.
So this next track is another one. When I saw Mutant Camels on the list, I thought, oh, well, that one's going to be fun to talk about. This next title is also, there's a kind of a silliness to it that I like. What is the story with William Wobbler?
Yeah, this is number 2, coming back to numbered titles from William Wobbler. And I've picked this one very specifically because a lot of the tracks we've heard so far have had a bit of a dark edge to them, for sure. And strangely, that doesn't quite represent what Ben was known for. Ben had a nickname, which was Bouncy Ben, because a lot of his tracks and a lot of his themes were so playful and almost childlike at times in that bouncy quality. And we haven't really had a tune that fully shows that off yet. A lot of them have been in the minor key and pretty dark. So this is a classic Bouncy Ben tune to come off the back of, which I recognise is quite a morose cover on my part, to try and cheer people up a bit. And it's also, as you've said, we've had some big, long 6-minuters. This one's only about 2.5 minutes, I think. So it's just quick, snap, classic Bouncy Ben before we get into some more serious topics to end the show.
Excellent. All right, well, let's get into it.
Number 2, again, my favourite numbered titles from William Wobbler, Ben Daglish, classic Bouncy Ben.
Bouncy is the perfect word. I couldn't sit still while that was on, and it is interesting. I am a sucker for melancholy tunes, and so I really loved Jamie's cover and your cover, and the sort of dark prog sound from earlier in the show. Mm-hmm. But you mentioned this is what he's well known for, and this is a lot of fun. This really, really great stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of tracks in Ben's catalogue that follow this kind of formula, and that is what he was known for in the 80s. But I'm glad that you say that you like that kind of moody sound too, because that's what I'm attracted to as well. So the playlist might reflect me more than Ben so far.
Well, that's all right. This is as much about what my guests love about these composers as it is. It's really more that than trying to fit their whole repertoire into a 10-track playlist, because that's just impossible. And everybody has their own reasons for approaching some of these composers, and so I think that is fitting and gives us more to talk about. But
yeah, absolutely.
So,
and I do have a particular soft spot for this tune from William Wobbler that I wanted to bring up, which is my ex-co-host.
I was going to say, yeah, go ahead.
My ex-co-host on my old podcast, Soundcast Live, which hopefully is coming back soon, whenever I can, Dale Fowler, who only stopped doing it with me because he's had to move down to London, actually. He's a busy boy with work now. He's unable to do it with me. But he did it by my side for about a year. And he hasn't got the history of VGM love and devotion that you and I have. And he was falling in love with it through the show, which is one of the reasons why I had him as my co-host, because I wanted to get his completely raw reactions. He came along with me to the 8-bit symphony, which was when a lot of classic C64 tunes were rendered with a huge orchestra. I'm not sure whether it was for the first time, but it felt like it was such a huge event. And they played William Wobbler, and he just adored it, and it kind of sums up his personality, that bouncy kind of silly carefreeness. And William Wobbler was a big one for Dale, my co-host, falling in love with VGM, and it was just wonderful to see that live on his face.
I'll bet. That's very cool. Very cool story. And I love that dynamic of somebody who's a little bit more new to the scene or is discovering things for the first time. That's maybe one of the things I enjoy the most about doing this with my kid, is that I'm getting to sort of share their first experience in this. And that's really cool. I'm glad that you and he have had that, even if for only a short time, that now you'll have that as a memory that you'll be able to just sort of share. That's really neat.
Well, the Soundtest Live will definitely be back as soon as I possibly can. And I'm pretty sure Dale will be popping up on it a few times. We've been playing Rocket League with each other obsessively lately, and Soundtest has come up a couple of times. I know he'd like to.
I'm really eager for it. So I know you've been dealing with some things on the hiatus, but I am excited for just personally for you, and also just selfishly for me, because I love the show so much. I'm excited for it to come back. So.
Yeah, once it does, there's going to be so much. The live show was always running, and God knows I've still got so many more interviews to publish. It's paining me that I'm not able to publish them, but as soon as I can, I will.
Well, while we're racing toward the return of the sound test, our next track is not as fun as that. A Race to the Debt. That almost sounds like it's a bad translation of a Japanese name. What is the story behind this track?
Now, this is a really interesting one, because we mentioned earlier on in the podcast that Ben Daglish didn't transition so much to later systems. You find that his catalogue on the C64 is absolutely massive, but you don't see his name popping up on the Super Nintendo or the Mega Drive, and after that, certainly not. He kind of transitioned more into doing more kind of live work, and I think he might have been a teacher on the side. But this is one of his later compositions, actually from the soundtrack to a film.
Oh, very cool.
And the film in question, in this case, is From Bedrooms to Billions, which is actually a documentary about the whole kind of British gaming scene from 1979, I think a little bit up to today. And it's got all kinds of really cool interviews in there, and I'm pretty sure Ben Daglish is featured in there at some point. But interestingly enough, he did some of the music to the actual soundtrack, original music for the soundtrack. I think Rob Hubbard did as well, and I think a few other of those classic C64 composers got involved with the soundtrack. But this is one of his tunes from that soundtrack, so it's later Ben Daglish, and it is very electronic. It's almost like being able to hear Ben Daglish compose for something like the PlayStation 1 or something like that. It's fascinating stuff, and again, some great bass going on in this.
Once again, from the British documentary Bedrooms to Billions, this is Ben Daglish's piece, Race to the Debt.
Race to the Dead, from the soundtrack to From Bedrooms to Billions, which, as I say, is full of interesting music from a variety of composers from the time, I believe.
Yeah, it looks really interesting. I have not seen this, and I'm going to have to dig into it. It's because this is a scene, like I said, that I'm definitely going to want to learn more about. But this is very cool. I noticed that the movie came out in 2014, and so this is definitely much more recent. And it's fun hearing what he does with more instruments, with a little bit less limitation. But he definitely still has that electronic sensibility that he's bringing to this.
Yeah, and I didn't realise that it was that late. I thought the film was a lot earlier, so that must be one of his last public compositions, really, because he wasn't releasing all that much around that time. There was a lot of live work, but not new stuff.
So live work is you've touched on it a little bit. That's he, and I saw actually a couple of pictures when I was doing my research of him doing some live stuff. And now that I think on it, I think one of those was of him playing flute, and so I must have, either that didn't register with me, or it just because when you mentioned flute earlier, I was caught a little bit by surprise. So, but you mentioned that we're going to be hearing something from him live on the episode here toward the end. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the next track. That's Serendipity for you.
Oh yeah, very cool. So we are going from 2014 to a live performance in 2016. Do you want to talk a little about what's coming up?
Well, this is where we return to some of the sadness of the fact that Ben passed away. And I feel kind of stupid because I didn't see it coming and didn't know it was going to happen. But those closest to Ben, of course, did. And during this recording, Ben was actually going through chemotherapy. For what eventually took his life, unfortunately. And this is an unbelievably emotional performance. As Chris Abbott put it, who was heavily involved in the 8-Bit Symphony, and we'll come to him soon, as Chris Abbott put it, there wasn't a dry eye in the house because of the context of the whole thing. And he's playing alongside the Fastloaders, who we mentioned earlier on, who are providing the guitar accompaniments and things like that.
Oh, wow.
I cannot begin to tell you how special this recording is, and you're going to have to hear it for yourself. I'm just trying to get you excited. This is like some of his last musical expressions to the world, and he knows it, and is putting that into his music, and it's just outstanding. And knowing that, it's tough to come out of it with a dry eye, it is. So good luck with that one. And this is the Wastelands Loader, if I'm not wrong. Please remind me, Bedrock, because I haven't got the list in front of me.
Oh yes, yeah. The Wastelands Loader, and you've got it labelled as Underworld. Is that where he played it?
Yes, absolutely.
So Wastelands Loader from The Last Ninja. Again, this was played live at Underworld in 2016.
Wastelands Loader, composed by Ben Daglish, but I believe with Anthony Lees, but certainly performed by Ben Daglish right there. Absolutely outstanding, alongside the Fastloaders.
That was incredible. While we were talking, I pulled up the video on YouTube, and I love that instrument. Is that that's an Irish whistle of some kind, I believe, right?
Yeah, you've got me scared now, because I've been saying flute all this time, but it might turn out that I'm totally wrong. It's certainly something that you blow into.
I was talking to Brian last week, and there's a Koshiro track from Puzzle & Dragons X that relies heavily on a Japanese flute, and I'm sure it's not really a flute, but that's what we called it. It's just, it is what it is, but whatever that instrument is, at one time I think I heard an Irish pen whistle or something like that, but I absolutely adore it, and you were right. I mean, you can see it in the video, but just in the expression of the instruments, there's this plaintive sound to the playing that is just, melancholy is just the first step in describing that sound. Really, really fantastic pick for the show.
It certainly sounds to me that he knew there wasn't long left, and he's gonna scream one last time into the musical abyss, and how beautiful it is. But we've talked about Ben being Bouncy Ben, and he was an endlessly uplifting figure. He was such a friendly man, always cheerful, always unbelievably funny. So the last thing he would want is some dark cloud over things. So I always try to move things back in that bouncy direction with Ben. So, with that in mind, I don't think he'd mind me being so self-deprecated as to say, let's find out if Ben Daglish played flute or not. Because now I'm scared. So do a little bit of research for me, Bedroth, right here now, live on the show. Did Ben Daglish play flute in any capacity? Because if not, I've got to get prepared to make some apologies here.
I'll have to take a look. Like I said, I'm sure I saw... Okay, yeah, I did. I saw this picture. He learned several instruments, including flute, piano, and guitar. He played with the school's orchestra as a chief percussionist and later as a conductor. And yeah, there's an image right here. When you type in Google, did Ben Daglish play the flute? Yeah, he's playing a flute, for certain.
Excellent. Yes, that's all I wanted to know. Excellent, I'm not completely wrong. But yeah, no, you are right. There's some kind of whistle going on that live performance instead, I think. I'm going to need to look deeper into that, because I put the video on myself last night, but as soon as the music started, I just closed my eyes, man.
Oh, yeah. And I'll have a link to the video in the show notes as well. I actually just added it while we were talking. It's so good, and you mentioned that you don't. He wouldn't have wanted to hang, us to hang around with the dark cloud over us. And this next song is the longest one that we're going to be playing. It's also, we've mentioned it a couple of times, and I think that this is also one of his better known pieces from the research that I did. And since on my show we're actually going to be talking after this last music, and then we'll finish with a play out of the theme song. I'd like to go ahead and get to this because I feel like I'm going to have some things to say. Okay. Tell me about Trap.
Okay, Trap is pretty much Ben Daglish's key tune. It's not actually from a C64 game, it's from a C64 demo, which you've mentioned the demo scene before. That's where people are just like making a little animation to show off what the system can do. It's not even a game. And he composed this to go with a demo. It's kind of like an animation of in space, of planets moving around each other and getting invaded and things like that. So he's created this long, I think it's nearly 9-minute space opera epic to go with it that really does push the C64 to its complete limits. And not only that, but Ben Daglish's compositional ability to his complete limits, because he very much approached this as composing for an orchestra, which, knowing that he only had 3 channels of sound to play with, that he actually was able to emulate an orchestra pretty convincingly is unbelievably impressive. But we had a chronological twist to today's show, and this is not the original C64 trap. This is the 8-bit Symphony Orchestral Rendition of Trap that unfortunately Ben never actually got to hear. But he did work on it alongside Chris Abbott, who helped me provide this to the show today. He was involved in pretty much all of the 8-bit Symphony, and it's probably the best celebration of Ben Daglish's music that I can think of.
Well, then we're not going to waste any more time. Let's listen to the 8-bit Symphony Orchestra's rendition of Trap by Ben Daglish.
the amazing 8-bit symphony version of Trap, written by Ben Daglish, of course. And I think it's the Czech Symphony Orchestra recorded on that, actually. And it's just so incredible to hear it in that full orchestral form, just like Ben had in mind when he only had 3 channels of audio to play with. I would have loved to hear that.
Oh, it's so great to think of these composers having a chance to finally realize what was in their minds all this time. I talked about that back on the Mitsuda episode, and how in 2015 he released a compilation of tracks from Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross, and actually said that those were the ideas he'd had in mind since 1995. And that was 20 years. This was the 30th anniversary of the writing of Trap, because it looks like this came out... Oh, I'm thinking, okay, so the Underworld performance was 2016. This was... I'm not sure, do you know when the 8-Bit Symphony performed this for the first time?
Well, I ought to know, because I was some kind of peripherally involved. The CD came out last year, in 2020, if I'm not wrong. But it was first performed properly in front of an audience in 2019 in Hull. which is actually only about half an hour's drive away from where I live, fortunately.
Oh, wow.
And is the hometown of Rob Hubbard. So,
okay.
Yeah, that was really cool. And I was very lucky to be there. It was incredible to hear that rendered live like that for the first time.
Yeah,
and I know what that meant to Rob Hubbard, as you said earlier, sorry.
No, that's okay, go ahead.
These composers getting to hear it like this. I know what it meant to Rob Hubbard and how he was involved as well in the arrangements of it, just like Ben was before he passed away. So, yeah, there's no doubt about how much he would have adored to hear that.
And for 2019, that means this was 33 years after Ben wrote the original Trap demo tune. And in 1986, he would have turned 20 years old.
yeah, coming out with things like that.
Someone who's pushing 40, the idea of someone who is 20 coming out with something like this is just mind-blowing. But for people like my 16-year-old co-host who's doing his own composition, that has to be inspiring. That somebody that age can already be so proficient as to do something like this.
Absolutely.
And I made the connection to The Planets by Gustav Holst. This is really almost like Ben's own sort of Planets symphony. It's got its own movements and everything, and it changes from part to part. And I've talked before on the show about how undeniable the influence of Holst is on all of the popular music that came after. And this is definitely a fitting sort of entry in that tradition. Such a great tune.
Holst is in there for sure, but as we mentioned while we were listening to it, there's also that sneaky little hidden reference to War of the Worlds in there as well, which is always nice.
Yep. I can't remember who... Do you know? I'm going to have to look it up. Who composed the War of the Worlds score?
Oh yeah, Jeff Wayne. I'm obsessed. I am obsessed with that CD, my friend. Double CD, actually.
Perfect. All right. Film is an area that I don't know as well as video games, obviously.
Oh, no, I mean, this is the musical version of War of the Worlds, which is purely musical. It's just on the CD. It's not from a film or anything like that.
Oh, okay. Very cool. Very cool. So
you should definitely check it out if you like your prog rock, my friend. It's classic prog rock, cheesy version of the War of the Worlds story, just in music.
Well, that sounds great. I love those kinds of things where you have a musical narrative, things like this, and even here's a throwback, Peter and the Wolf, and things like that. It's really cool stuff.
I love Peter and the Wolf. I love Peter and the Wolf. I borderline ripped it off for some music that I worked on lately. So yeah, I love that theme.
Well, I love this theme, man. This was an epic way to close things out, and really. It's fun because it's from his early compositional years, but this particular rendition is one of the last things that he worked on, and so it's a perfect sort of bookend and really kind of fitting to be his magnum opus here on the episode today.
Really
very
epic
good stuff.
Too.
Well, this has been as enjoyable as I thought it would be. This has been a rewarding conversation. I'm really glad to have explored this part of the VGM landscape that I don't get to venture into very often. And it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. I've been an admirer of your work for a long time, as you know. And so you mentioned at the top of the show that you're honored to be here. The honor is definitely mine. And thank you so much. Is there anything else that you would like to say about Ben that we haven't fit into the last 2 hours?
Well, I'd like to quickly say thank you. That's all so sweet of you, and it really is an honour to be here, man. And this is actually our first time talking with our voices, and we've always gotten on so well in DMs. I knew it would go well, so it's been great to do. And thank you again for having me on. As for Ben. No, I just hope it's given you a good, given any listeners who hasn't listened to this kind of thing, a good look into the C64, wanted to find out more about it. And for me, there's a lot of C64 composers I could have looked at. Rob Hubbard. I tell you, I was on the edge of looking at Jerome Tell, because I'm obsessed with that man's music. But at the end of the day...
It's so good.
It really is. Well, Ben Daglish seemed to be such a fitting symbol of the C64 scene, one of its most popular composers, and as I've talked about on my own show, Alex's show, and now this show, I'll always feel this really strange and sad connection to him because of what happened with his loss and with being his last interviewer and everything. I mean, it's not really that special, but it devastated me, and it'll always make him an unbelievable presence in my mind.
Absolutely, and understandably, and you're very welcome, and thank you again for bringing this up. And we'll have to bring you back sometime. We can talk about just the C64 in general. We can talk about Rob Hubbard, Juro and Tell. I know that you're a huge fan of the work of David Wise, and so we definitely no shortage of things for us to talk about. And who knows? Maybe after you come back,
I think that just like you. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, that's okay.
Do you want to go ahead with like a clear edit point? Because there was a bit of lag there.
Yeah, I can make this work in post, so that's fine. Go ahead, what were you going to say?
I actually can't remember, because the whole thing confused me. You know how that happens.
Yep. Well, I was saying, who knows, maybe when the sound test comes back, I can return the favor and come join you sometime. That would be fun.
Oh, absolutely. You'll be more than welcome, my friend.
And the sound test, I just want to say briefly, is one of my favorite VGM podcasts. I mentioned it on my tribute last year, and of course I'm a huge fan of the whole scene, but one of the things that sticks out to me about the sound test is just the sort of documentary style presentation you do. It's primarily an interview show, except for the live shows, but instead of just the back and forth Q&A and then playing a few songs that you hear a lot on VGM podcast interviews, or just where it's instead of just strictly a back and forth like you get on the AIS Game Maker's Notebook with Austin Wintory, you present it, you make a production out of it, and you like introduce it very well. You introduce the host, and then you sort of you'll throw a question out, and then you bring on audio of the guest, not the host, the guest rather, of the guest answering the question and talking. But it's again, really more of a documentary style presentation, and that's really refreshing. And you pepper it in with some really great music as well. And it's just, while you're waiting, if anybody has not checked out the sound test before, while you're waiting on Lee to be able to get back, there is a deep and rich well of content that you can go back and check out. And there will be a link, as I said, both to the podcast and to Lee's own musical work in the show notes. So definitely want to go check that out.
Oh, that's so fantastic. Thank you so much, man.
You're very welcome, man. Is there anything else you would like to talk about or to plug on the show?
No, I mean, fortunately, I've been able to sneak in a little plug to my Spotify with Mutant Camels, so I don't even need to do that. We're all good here. And you've been so sweet about the sound test. I really appreciate that, so I don't think I've got any extra words to add there.
Okay, well, I meant every word. So thanks again for being on the show, and it's been a little bit of a long one because of some of the long tunes and just the fact that you and I had so much to talk about. So I think we're ready to go ahead and wrap things up. So I guess all that's left is, as always, until next time, play very good games.
Be very good people.
And keep listening to very good music.
Do the research for me, Bedroth. Make sure this is on the Amiga. And don't worry about editing any stuff like that out, because I don't mind being wrong and then like coming back to it and saying, we figured it out, it is the Amiga.
Good
That's
deal.
Fine.
Yeah. Usually I don't edit too much for content unless my guest says, hey, could you this is off the record, or hey, could you leave that out? So just let me know. Otherwise I'll keep it organic.
Yeah. So far, there's nothing like I'm like embarrassed about. But the chronologicalness of this, there's one for the proof.
Here we go. I've got so much I wanted to say, and I'm just holding it in until we actually start talking.
No problem, man. But you was hitting on something really interesting there. Can you remind me of what you just said? 'Cause my head's all over the place at the moment. It's still late for me.
Oh, well, yeah. I was talking about the how Matt Gray was there in the 80s, was also still involved in the music scene moving forward, and how this is really kind of sort of a mesh of sensibilities. And hearing those classic, the chimey C64 trills and arpeggios. Yeah.
That's it. Sorry about that, man. I got there.
No, that's okay.
I knew there was something I wanted to talk about. The trills and arpeggios. Excuse me, dude. Just let me cough for a second. I needed to do that throughout that whole thing. So and then I'll continue on.
I'm impressed.
The main theme from Auf Wiedersehen, Monty, by both Rob Hubbard and let me do that again.
We will have some blooper reels.
That's one for the... Yeah. I knew I'd make a mistake eventually. Right. Let me get some of this mucus in place. Sorry, dude, but it's the way it is.
No, that's all right. A couple of episodes ago, when we did the Mitsuda episode, was still getting over his COVID stuff, and he sounded pretty bad.
Right. Okay, I'm ready to go. Okay.
All right. All right.
No, he'll be totally friendly. Do me a favour before I jump into this one. Oh, no,
yes.
It's okay. I'd forgotten what the next track was, but I know what it is now. I'm okay.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear about this, because this is quite a title.
Yes. We'll get to that. Right, so where were we? The main theme from the... Oh, right, sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, I'm ready to go.
I don't play enough instruments with enough... I am really having trouble thinking of my words today.
Don't worry about it, man.
Enough expertise, I guess, is a close enough word, to have attempted a cover yet. Plays trumpet, plays flute, and he really wants us to try to put something together at some point. And I just haven't buckled down and done it, but I should. It would be a really fun memory to make.
Bass is a good one to learn, man, because as I say, it is easy to learn. You can really tick along nicely on the bass without having to put too much effort in.
All right, and that is a wrap